Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the kickoff, or actually our second Innovative Benefits webinar series session, Flexible Schedules, Remote Work and Time Off. Thank you for being with us. My name is Becky Reich, and I am the Director of Quality for the Youth Worker Wellbeing Project. And I just lost my controls. Give me a second here. Hold on. All right, there we go. Sorry about that. All right. For those of you not familiar with IYI, our mission is to improve the lives of all Indiana children by strengthening and connecting the people, organizations, and communities that are focused on kids and youth. Today's agenda for this session will include these introductions. We'll do some webinar housekeeping, and then we'll jump right into the topic today with Michelle. We will do a little question and answer after that. But make sure you stick around because we will also make sure that we are connecting you with additional no-cost resources provided to you by the Youth Worker Wellbeing Project that will also support your team and organizational well-being. So the Youth Worker Wellbeing Project is a collaborative statewide effort to improve the lives of Indiana's youth workers so they can more effectively work with youth. Project partners for the Youth Worker Wellbeing Project include Indiana After School Network, IARCA Institute for Excellence, Indiana Youth Services Association, Marion County Commission on Youth, and of course, Indiana Youth Institute. Before we officially begin, I want to share a few pointers that will help you engage with today's webinar. For any tech issues, use the chat feature, send us a message, and we will assist you. You also can use this feature throughout to engage with the presenter and the group as well. We do encourage you to ask questions, and we've enabled the Q&A feature for any that you may have. So make sure you drop those in there. We'll answer those throughout and save space at the end, and you can upvote any great questions. At the end of today's presentation in a follow-up email, you will receive a link to complete an evaluation. We would appreciate you do take a few minutes to let us know your thoughts about the presentation. If you don't receive that email, check junk as it may have been directed there. Once you complete the evaluation, you will then be redirected to your certificate of participation. And yes, like many of IYI's webinars, today's webinar will be posted on our website as a recording if you'd like to revisit it later or share it with others. So our Innovative Benefits webinar series with our partners from Purple Inc. This, as I mentioned, is session 2 with many more to come. This series is designed for youth-serving organizational leaders and human resource professionals to learn about the latest trends, best practices, and employee benefits so that you can gain tools to boost employee retention, satisfaction, and of course, overall well-being. Without further ado, the part you really came here for, our presenter today is Michelle Kellen. Michelle's the Director of Learning and Development with Purple Inc. And you are in wonderful hands with more than 3 decades of human resource, EIAB experience in nonprofit management, healthcare, commercial real estate, and financial services. Michelle works with organizations to enhance culture and create a more inclusive workplace where team members feel they belong and can reach their potential. And with that, Michelle, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Becky. I appreciate that. Good afternoon. We are officially in the afternoon hour now. Good afternoon, everyone, and happy Thursday. I'm really excited to be here with all of you today to talk about why flexibility and remote work matters now more than ever. And as we kick this off, I want you to just take a moment and think about how has your own relationship with work changed over the last few years? You know, how has that idea of what work means changed for you? And just something to think about as we go through this presentation today, because I really want to focus on some of the trends we're seeing, some of the things that are just becoming tried and true. And so we'll be looking at that. So Let's really start with our next slide about talking about why flexibility and remote work matters now more than ever. If we think about pre-pandemic, and who can imagine that that's been 5 years already? I mean, I just can't even fathom that some days. But when we think about how the pandemic really redefined what was possible in terms of remote work, when the pandemic happened, I was actually working with a not for profit, and we had some pretty strict rules about working from home. It had to be a severe emergency or you needed to be sick. Now, we won't even talk about working remotely when you're sick. That's a whole different conversation about expectations of being ill and out ill and work life balance and all those things. But what happened literally in one day, I went from having 100 employees in kind of an open concept office and saying, you can only work from home if it's an emergency or you're sick, to I need everybody to get your laptops and I need you to leave the building and we'll see you in a couple weeks. Yes, initially my email said we'll see you in a couple weeks. And actually 15 months later, we were all back in the office on a more hybrid schedule, right? So the pandemic changed our perception of what remote work looks like. And it also really changed the fact that it was usually an anomaly, mainly big companies, right? International companies, to it becoming more of mainstream. We also see that employees or potential employees are making decisions about where they work based on a couple things. Research tells us development opportunities and flexibility or work life integration. We are seeing that they value that even more than comp and benefits. So we continue to see too an increase in the remote hybrid roles that are continuing to increase. We know that research is telling us that we see higher engagement and lower burnout from employees who have flexibility in their scheduling. And while some research says that it is a top priority for millennials and Gen Z entering leadership to have workplace flexibility, I would challenge that research a little and say we all love the idea of having flexibility in our schedules. It's not just the millennials and the Gen Zs who like that flexibility. I would think we all do. So, a question I have for all of you, and feel free again to put your responses in the chat for now, and later we'll open up for some additional questions where with everybody's mics open. But what are some things that resonate most for you from this list when you think about this list? How has your organization currently adapted to the trends? So, feel free to throw that in the chat about how you are adjusting currently to that. And thank you also for introducing yourselves to one another. So as you put that in the chat, I know Becky's going to be watching for some of your answers to be able to share, and we'll continue to move on, but want to come back to some of these ways in which you're being flexible. So when we think about flexible schedules, let's really talk about what that means. So when I'm talking about that, how I'm defining it is it's about giving employees more control over how, when, and even where they work. It's not just talking about people being allowed to work from home, right? It's really about creating a culture that empowers employees and employers to make choices that fit the employee's personal life, their business life, their goals and objectives, as well as what is needed for organization success. So there has to be that balance there, right? It's not a one or. As you think about that, just think for yourself, what does flexibility in your own work life look like? Is it a location? Is it the hours? Is it the freedom to work in the time frame that fits your flow the best? If you're a morning person, an afternoon person, think about what that looks like for you as an individual. So one of the most common ways that we see flexible schedules show up is employees choosing their start and end times. We're seeing that more and more often. This allows employees to adjust their work times based on what fits into their personal responsibilities, dropping off kids, public transportation schedules, other caregiving that they might have. Again, this has to be a combination of what works for you as an organization and works for the employee. We are also seeing more and more organizations move to compressed work weeks. Now, many organizations, and I know I've worked for several, that in the summertime have what we call compressed work weeks, where we worked the 10-hour, 4 days, Monday through Thursday, and then we were closed on Fridays during summer hours, or we got a half day on a Friday. And to make sure that we met the business need, it wasn't a total shutdown of all employees, right? It was your group A, these are your Fridays, your group B, these are your Fridays, and it allowed to keep the operations going while also giving someone the flexibility to have a Friday off. We are seeing a huge trend in Europe where this is becoming now some countries' standards. They're going to compress their work weeks for everyone. The other thing that we're seeing that's not as common, that may be something new to all of you, is this concept of results only work environment. So, this is a really big trend that has not a big concept that has not really become a trend yet um, across the nation, across the country, but we're starting to see it pick up a little momentum. And it's the mindset that we care about the work that gets done, not necessarily the clock. So, you're saying, here's the outcome I need by the end of the week. I need this project, these 3 goals done on this project by Friday. How you do that is, up to you as an employee, but this is the deadline and what I need to do. So if that means somebody says, you know what, I'm going to crank this out in 12 hours in one sitting because that's how I work best, I'm just in a flow, then we're not going to say, oh, but you worked 12 hours in one day, but you didn't work any hours in the next day. So we look at those results more than we look at the actual clock. So what are some ways that you are using any of these type of concepts with flexible schedules? Do you allow your employees to choose their start and end times? Do you have compressed work weeks? I think you're putting some information in the chat. Becky, would you want to share a few of the things that folks are sharing?
Sure, yeah, it looks like maybe the most common is more flexible time or potentially offering a couple days of remote work and allowing employee choice in what those days are. I do want to draw attention to an interesting point too, that sometimes maybe that sits wrong with other staff that maybe don't feel remote work is a very like strong model, or that like work is not happening when not at work.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And that's something we want to talk about, especially when we're talking about remote work models. So let's go ahead and advance and talk about remote work models a little bit. We have a couple options, right? Fully remote. A lot of organizations did that during the pandemic. There are some organizations that are still fully remote, and we'll talk about some of the reasons they've done that a little later on as well. Majority of organizations I'm seeing right now are on some kind of hybrid schedule. When we came back from the pandemic, we did the Monday, Friday, we're going to work remotely. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, everybody's going to be in the office. That way we can make sure we have collaboration opportunities. We have time to have FaceTime with one another and have all those culture building activities, if you will, during those hybrid schedules. We are seeing a trend toward organizations starting to demand that all their employees come back full time, 5 days a week, pretty standard hours. I will tell you that some of the research is telling us they're having difficulty hiring folks and retaining folks with some of those schedules. So we are seeing people still have a desire for more of the hybrid type schedule. The other thing we see is the remote first. And what that means is your first preference for the organization is for folks to be remote. However, you keep a footprint, a smaller footprint than what you previously had, but you do have space for those who, look, I can't work from home. I got 12 kids, I got 8 cats. I don't want to work from home. Or I live right down the street. It's just easier for me to pop in the office and utilize that space. Or we need conference rooms. So you have that space for those activities, but you're keeping that remote first as your primary for folks. So I heard you say, Becky, right, that the majority of folks you're working in a hybrid environment. Is that correct?
It looks like maybe more just leaning into the flexibility, or yes, hybrid with some days in office and some days remote. Yes, seems to be the most common answer.
I would be curious to know for those of you who are currently in a hybrid, and if people can and want to come off mute, that would be fine. Those of you who do have a hybrid schedule, how do you have that hybrid schedule set up? Are there days when you have everybody out and everybody in, or do people get to choose? And you can toss
Yeah,
that.
I don't believe that they can unmute, but it looks like we've
Okay.
got, right, like offering 2 days remote work by choice. Lots of probably coming in the summer here, maybe some tweaks because of summer. So half day Fridays in the summer, rotating people who are working, 4 10s in the summer with flexibility to do Friday or Monday off. People get to choose 3 days in, 2 remote. Looks like lots of Fridays off. And then yeah, some that are because of client facing are needing to be in office due to client services being provided.
Right. And we'll talk a little bit about too when you do have a department or an area where you have to be in the office or you have to be in the community or we really should say you get to be in the community. What does that look like and what are some other things we can do? I spent several years working in financial services, and while people who were working in the shredding department at headquarters could take every Friday afternoon off, we could not have the staff in the branches have take every other Friday afternoon off. We would have had customers revolting at the door if the branches were closed every Friday afternoon. And so we had to look at ways in which we could have some flexibility with them while at the same time making sure we met the customer needs. So we'll chat a little bit more about that as well. So we do have these models that now, one of the ones I'm really excited about, and I got to admit, I think about this a lot, this nomad employee, being able to work from anywhere, having that geographical flexibility, right? Whether it's domestic or international, to think about the opportunity to work somewhere else. So just for fun, I throw this in the chat for us, if you will. If you could work anywhere, let's just say for 3 weeks, we'll make it a small time. If you could work anywhere in the country or in the world for 3 weeks, where would you go? Where would you be a nomad to? Ah, Hawaii, love that. A beach, absolutely. Oh, Spain, nice. Crete, Greece. I'm loving this. Obviously, I'm not the only one who's thought about this. The how quickly you all have been able to respond tells me that you've had a chance to think about that. So, yeah, mine is Italy. I would love to go Tuscany specifically. I'd love to spend 3 weeks in Tuscany working. So, as we think about this idea of nomad work, of being able to go somewhere else and work, we saw some of this during COVID. I had some employees that they lived by themselves in apartments here in Indianapolis, and all their family, one, they were in North Carolina, all their family was in Michigan, another one, they were out in Arizona. And it was hard to be here in the middle of COVID by yourself in an apartment. And so we made arrangements for them to be able to work remotely from their family homes in these different states. So maybe it wasn't nomad by choice and where they ended up, but it was an opportunity for them to have connections. One of the things that you have to be very cautious of with nomad workers, and I think Susan just popped this up in the chat actually, is you have to give some consideration. This point about a digital nomad policy. You really need to have a policy because here are some things you've got to consider. First of all, how long are you going to allow them to work either abroad or work from another location in the United States? What are some of the security implications of having that done? And I'm talking about really what are your security protocols for technology, for information that you're sharing? The other thing you have to think about is what are the taxes or legal implications that could arise? Even with hiring folks from other states, and I'll mention this again when I talk about that, if you hire folks from other states, you have to be very careful to know what the labor laws are for those states, what the tax laws are for those states. They're very different. Some states are extremely employee friendly. Some states are extremely employer friendly. And you need to make sure you know what those implications are before you hire someone who's from another state or you have people working in other states or in other countries. So all things that you need to consider if you do have a nomad policy and what that could look like. I think you also shared, Becky, if people have questions to put those in the chat and we'll talk about those toward the end to talk about that. The other part that we are seeing is this idea of asynchronous work. So focusing on deliverables, not real-time communication. We especially see this happening with organizations that have an international presence, right? So you're working on a project here in Indianapolis, but your coworker who's on the project with you is in London. And so you're using systems like Asana or Trello to try to collaborate without having those actual times where you're face to face or you're in teams on a document. So being able to have those projects and have a system that you can work on those projects without being face to face. And that also gives people the flexibility to work when they're most productive, right? The time of day that they're most productive. It helps with that time lapse that you have. So I was recently working with a client in Australia, and it's 5:30 p.m. for me, it's 7:30 a.m. for him, and we're collaborating, working on a project. The majority of what we were doing, we were able to do in this asynchronous, just put the work out there in the software, do the majority of the work that way, so we could limit how many times I was either on the phone at 6, 7, 8 o'clock at night while he was on the phone, or in the middle of the night, as the case may be. So we see some asynchronous work working in that way. So let's talk a little bit about what some of the benefits are for the employers. So there's some benefits that we see when we look at how this can benefit you as an employer when you're thinking about all the different ways to provide flexibility for folks, whether it's time of day and scheduling, whether it's where they work from, whether it's co-working space in your office, from their home, from New Zealand. When you think about that, here are some reasons that organizations are moving or continuing to stay flexible with their employees. One, we know that it improves retention. Some of the research is telling us that this also increases employees' sense of value because when they can be flexible in their schedule, what they are hearing from that or feeling from that is that you trust them, um, that they are valued, that you see them as a whole person, right? They're a whole person that has a life outside of the organization. So it improves retention of your folks. There is research that tells us there's higher productivity for employees when they have flexibility. Some of that is because they can be more productive when it's best for them, right? When they can work their best, it increases their productivity. A pitfall, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, with this idea of higher productivity is also how they work when they work. And we'll talk a little bit about what some of those statistics look like, but also how that affects um, them as individuals. So we also see the opportunity to have a larger talent pool. And that goes back to that idea, again, with caution, that you can hire people from other parts of the country and have a bigger footprint on who can work in your organization. Again, that's different if you're client facing and you have to have folks who are in right here in the Indianapolis or central Indiana area. So looking at how you can have that larger talent pool. Another benefit of having flexibility in schedules is this idea of reduced overhead. That smaller footprint I was talking about earlier when it's remote first. We saw a lot of organizations have very large footprints and a lot of space. And then during COVID, there was nothing harder, I think, than sitting knowing that there was a big space with 100 desks sitting empty in an office for months. But that was the reality of the world we lived in. And so, as organizations came out of COVID, we did see organizations that, as they moved to more flexibility and more remote work, reduce their overhead, whether that was space, but also then the cost of utilities, supplies. So a benefit is a reduction of overhead and what that looks like. As a side note to that, when employees were in the office, obviously we provided the paper, the desk, and all of those things necessary, those resources necessary to be productive in their work. When we went remote, as I said, it was March 17th, I actually kept a copy of the email and we went remotely. People pretty much took their laptops and that was it, right? Again, because we thought a couple weeks we'd be back. One of the things that I noticed when we were on Zoom calls with folks or team calls is the number of people who were sitting at their kitchen table or sitting on their beds working. And what we realized is we were really, not everyone was equipped to have a work from home. And so we gave every employee and then every new employee a small stipend. And they could use that stipend either to get a second monitor. We did do one monitor for everybody. They could do a second monitor. They could get a printer if they were someone who wanted or needed a printer for their work. They could use it to buy a better chair so they weren't sitting at a kitchen chair every day. And so we continued that trend with employees. And to this day, they still do that, where they give them a small stipend if they need a few things to help better equip themselves to work from home. But still finding, even with that stipend, that initial stipend, it gives them the flexibility to get what they need. For instance, I'm dyslexic, and so initially I did not have a printer in the house when we went remote. We would get a lot of documents to review. It's very difficult for me with a lot of documents, like 25-page documents, to be able to do that with just a computer screen. So I got a printer so that on some of those projects that I really needed to be able to print them out, to highlight them, to read through them in a different way, I could do that. So it's also creates a great way for you to help people with accessibility needs as well as that flexibility. And we found even with a stipend, um, we still saved on overhead. I saw a question just pop up. Did you have anyone who just took the stipend and didn't use the products that use it for products? To be honest, we did not monitor that. So people did not, they could apply for reimbursement for, initially they applied for reimbursement for the stipend. So they spent the money and then were reimbursed. But we found that was prohibitive for some people. That was a barrier for some folks. And so then we made the decision to give them the stipend. And we did not monitor or worry about how they spent that stipend, and here's why. Regardless of whether they bought a printer or a chair, one thing we knew, when they were working from home, they were putting an additional burden on their utilities and other things, their phones, um, their personal usage. And so we stopped monitoring that and we started just putting that stipend in the paycheck, or when if we hired someone new, it went in their first paycheck. And then we allowed them to do that without uh, the requirement of turning in paperwork. I noticed somebody else commented about, yes, it is taxable. And so there is a tax implication for a stipend for folks. If any other questions pop up, we can answer those too toward the end. The other thing is improving your employer brand. That's another benefit that we see, because companies, what we're finding is companies that are known for offering flexibility are able to attract talent. It becomes a competitive advantage. I would say we are almost to the point where it is a disadvantage if you don't have some form of flexibility. I teach at the Kelley School of Business, and the class that I teach is either their second to last semester or their last semester. So I get them there. They're basically their last year on campus. And all the things I talk about with them, one of the things I always ask them is, what are you looking for in an employer? And what's important to you? And I continuously hear those graduating students talk to me about um, development opportunities, because I try to have a realistic conversation with them that they're not going to be the CEO in 1 year, and they're not going to get promoted probably in their first 30 days of employment. So I try to set a little bit of a more realistic expectation than maybe some of them have about where they're going to start the organization and how quickly they're going to move. But they are concerned about their development. The other thing, though, that they say almost every single time is, I want flexibility. I want a good work-life balance or work-life integration. So, and then I talk more about what that means to them. So it does improve the employer brand, but also I almost think we're at the point it's really a necessity for folks. The other thing that is a benefit that we've seen come as a result of this is what is called disaster resilience. And what that really means is, well, next time we have a pandemic, if we have another pandemic, we all know how to react in a way that we did not necessarily before. It's also things like, how many of you have people that the minute the weather forecast, the weather person says, oh, we're going to get 8 inches of snow tomorrow morning. How many of you, especially as leaders, start getting the messages, the knocks on your door that say, are we gonna close the office tomorrow because it's gonna snow, or it's gonna rain and we're gonna have flood, or oh, it's the Indy 500. I'm not gonna be able to get to work because of the traffic, right? How many of you have had that experience? And so it's those kind of things. It's Dorsey just said they had a water main break and it took 9 weeks. Wow. And that is a long time to get, that's a long time to get a water break fixed. So yeah, it gives you the ability to be able to adjust to any disasters, tornadoes, water breaks, all of those things, power outages. So as you think about the benefits for the employers, back to the previous slide, sorry, Becky, which of these benefits would be most important to your organization right now? And feel free to put that in the chat. Is it for you about improving retention, getting higher productivity, having a bigger talent pool, improving your brand, having a disaster resilience plan? Yeah, I see some improved retention coming in. Yeah, and talent pool close behind for folks. I will say, as you all are popping these into the chat, and thank you for doing so, higher productivity, keeping that retention. I will share one thing that I I should have known with 35 years in HR, but really it was an epiphany for me during the pandemic. And that was when we do things that benefit the employees, it is so critical that we say it and we say it very clearly. And what I mean by that is we were doing a lot of employee surveys, right? We were doing those pulse surveys, those satisfaction surveys, all these different surveys to ask folks, what matters to them. And then we would get the feedback and we would implement something that came from the feedback. And then the next thing I would hear, especially as the HR leader, you all don't listen to us. You don't do anything that we want or need done. And then I'd be like, well, what about the fact that we put Keurigs in all the break rooms and there's free coffee in the break rooms? Oh, you did that because somebody suggested it? Yes, that was part of a survey result, right? And that's a small one. Or how about the fact that we added the option for you to have pet insurance and that you could do that through the organization through payroll deduction? Oh, I didn't realize that that was a suggestion. So, as you think about improving retention, as you do some of these things, whether it's flexible work, remote work, whether it's adding some benefits or changing the way you do your time off, which next time we're together, you're actually going to be with Jody Curtis, the CEO of and founder of Purple Ink. She's going to be talking about all these new time off and PTO trends that we're seeing. Be sure to share with employees how it benefits them, how it benefits you, because, right, so there's mutual benefit. And if it came as a result of talking to employees, be sure to share that. We heard you, and as a result, we're doing XYZ. Because very often they make suggestions or recommendations and then forget that they did, or they don't know that somebody else recommended that. So just something to add there that's worth having that do that. So I saw some great comments in there about how it helps you as employers. This slide should actually say benefits for employees. So let's talk about what some of the benefits are for employees. Better work-life integration. I think you've probably heard me say that a couple times. I don't really call it a balance. I don't know about you, but I have never figured out how to create this perfect balance between my work life, my personal life, it's really about integration and how do we integrate those things together? How do we weave both of those commitments that we have to our personal life, to our professional life to be a little more seamless? So when we think about better work-life integration, it gives a parent an opportunity to attend maybe a midday school event, right? When they're like, we're having a Veterans Day program at 11 a.m. and you go, yikes. Or my grandson just graduated from preschool and it was at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And so giving people that flexibility to do better work-life integration or taking an elderly parent to a doctor's appointment so you can hear firsthand what the doctor is really saying to them. So that integration gives us that opportunity to have that almost balance, if you will, but the integration. Reduce commuting stress. How many of you could just throw up your hand how many of you have experienced or are experiencing commuting stress, right? I mean, that's kind of an unfair question after this past weekend, considering we had a Fever game, a Pacers game, and the Indy 500 all within 3 or 4 days of each other. So I think there was a little commuting stress for everybody trying to get to work in the middle or so anywhere in the middle of all that. But we know this. That one study, I want to share this directly, so I've written this down. One study found remote employees regain an average of 54 minutes a day by not commuting. And that is the equivalent of nearly 6 extra work weeks each year. So that idea of not having commuter stress is a benefit to folks. Again, increasing your autonomy and control, being able to decide when it's best to work, taking that break to throw in a load of laundry, and then getting back to it. And that way of having that autonomy and control to figure out when I work best and how I can work best. The well-being. I don't know about you, but it was kind of nice in the pandemic to be able to put, when I was working 100% remotely, to put my earbuds in and have a walking meeting with someone. So that time to exercise, that time to sleep a little differently because I didn't have to make an hour commute every morning. So improving our employees' well-being. And also supporting diverse needs. So when we think about that, again, this flexibility really helps those that are caregivers. It helps people with disabilities, people who are uh, differently abled to be able to have that flexibility to work remotely where maybe it's more difficult for them to work in an office. Maybe you have an office building that is not the most conducive for people with different needs of space, and so you give them that diversity of option to work. When you think about that. And so it really creates that more diverse workforce that also then helps you have and I will say all the time, a diverse workforce fuels innovation and also it makes better decision making for organizations. So we talked about the benefits for employers and employees. Let's talk about some of those pitfalls and challenges. One, well, it's great that I can just run upstairs and my commute is literally, okay, if I walk, it's 2 minutes. If I run, it's less. I try not to run unless something's chasing me. So there's that. But it does blur the work-life balance for people. So we always have to be careful of that and how to make sure that people have that clear, I'm offline now, right? Because we're not jumping in the car and driving home. There is this concept of proximity bias that very often leaders tend to favor the people that they can see, that they have face time with. And so we have to make sure that we help leaders identify ways to overcome that bias and make sure it's based on this performance metrics. And maybe sometimes it is rotating people in the office, but being careful you don't just walk out and be like, hey, you, do you want to work on this project? We saw a lot of that as we came out of the pandemic. So communication gaps, make sure that whatever you have as a communication works. Is it Slack? Is it Teams? Is it Zoom? Is it, are you going to send emails? Is it going to be a text message? Whatever that is, make sure that you have expected forms of communication, expected timeframes in which communication happens. Nothing worse than sending a Teams message to somebody and 2 days later you're like, hello, is anyone there? So what are your expectations around how you'll communicate, where you'll communicate so that collaboration can occur? This idea of inequitable access to flexibility. This goes back to this idea fair is not equal, equal is not fair is not equal. So not everyone can do the same thing. Back to my reference of working in the branch. But then what did we do to increase their flexibility? We actually ended up having some substitute tellers who were floaters, and they would float to different branches so that we could give some of our staff a Friday afternoon off. And so we would have a group, and these floating trained tellers would float into branches to do that. So think about what can you do to create some equitable access to flexibility for your people. Isolation is a huge pitfall. Employees getting isolated from one another and from the rest of the world. We saw that in the midst of COVID. So how do you help your employees stay connected to each other? Maybe you have just a coffee chat where you're like, hey, on Wednesday morning from 8 to 8:30, we're going to open up a Zoom. We're going to call it a coffee chat. People can pop in, bring your cup of coffee, talk about whatever. Maybe you have a question of the day. Maybe you don't. Maybe you're just like, hey, how are the pets and the kids doing? But doing some things that can connect folks to one another. And then making sure your folks don't disconnect from the culture of your organization. The culture of your organization is not a building, though. It is about the people, it is about the relationship, it is about the mission and vision. So if you have people who are not coming together in a building, you got to be a great, great storyteller for folks and be able to keep them connected to the mission and the vision of your organization. So as we start to wrap up, let's talk about action steps that you can take. Oh, sorry, best practices. We can jump back. Um, we talked about this. Make sure you have clear expectations, establish your communication norms, train your managers in remote leadership skills. Back to that idea of not having proximity bias, but also talking about how you look at outcomes for work and how you hold people accountable. If you think people are not working when they're on remote days, how do you hold people accountable for that? What are some things that you can do, like the check-ins, the documentation, work shown? What are some of those things you can do? Offer the tools and support people need, whether it's software, hardware, whatever that looks like. Measure your outcomes and adjust your policies. You can pilot things. It's not a this is it and this is it forever and ever. Amen. That's how we're doing it. Adjust your policies regularly to keep up with everything that's changing, both with your employees, with your organization, and with the culture as a whole. Now on to action steps as we think about this. Again, I would encourage you to audit your current flexibility practices. What are you currently doing? And do you have departments that are doing or groups that are doing things differently than one another that could cause some conflict? But it might be okay as well, right? And that's something you really have to think about. So audit your flexibility practices. What are you doing and what aren't you doing? And why are you doing it or not doing it? Gather your employee input. Caution with this does not mean you're going to do everything your employees suggest, right? So setting that clear expectation. Hey, just want to hear from you about what's working, what's not working. Again, pilot those flexible options. This is not a everybody's doing this all at once. Maybe you want to start with one area and say, okay, we're going to pilot this idea that we're going to do a compressed work week. And we're going to pilot it with this particular group because it makes sense. It's easier to do. It's your operations folks. They're not client facing. And then we're going to see how that plays out. And we're going to evaluate and then we'll measure success from there. And then we're going to refine it. So don't feel like it's either all in or all out. There are ways to start to pilot some things and tell people that we're going to pilot this, we're going to measure the impact, and we'll go from there. So those are just a few of the action steps that you can take. I would encourage you to just take a moment to write down something that you heard today that you think you want to try, think that you want to explore a little more for yourself and for the organization. And just so you have a takeaway from today of something that you want to do as an action item. As always, you can connect with us with our e-newsletter and also with our podcast that we have. And Becky, if we have questions, these are also books that are coming out. So, and if you want to get a hold of me, you can always reach out to me. I'm on LinkedIn. And also you can always reach out to me via Purple Link.
Okay. Michelle, looks like the question I'm seeing that's not been addressed yet is, can we get suggestions on what to do when your work is mostly client facing?
Yeah, I think that one that's a little more difficult, right? One of the things that I think about is, are your client-facing hours dictated by when your staff is available or when services are available? And so what I mean by that is, if I have an employee who's like, hey, look, I'm a noon to 8er. I'm great from noon to 8 p.m. You're like, well, we only provide these programs between 8 and 5. Do you only provide the programs between 8 and 5 because that's the way it's always been? That's the only time you can get into the service, maybe it's particularly like it's associated with another organization and that's their hours. is it possible that you say, you know what? We could do visits in the evening. We could hold a group in the evening time. We might have a support group that meets in the evening instead of during the day. And then that way staff people can be there. I know that was something they went through recently with the animal shelter in town, right? They had volunteers that were there until 7, 8 o'clock at night, but then they didn't have staff who would be there till 7 or 8 o'clock at night. So they had to back away from their volunteers and their shelter hours in that way. There might have been more to that than just that, but that was one of the things that surfaced. So can you have some services that go beyond traditional core business hours is one thing to consider.
Another question is, where can we get more on accountability for remote work?
Can you repeat that?
Where can we get more on accountability for remote work?
Oh, great question. So I can there's a couple different resources on ways to do that with folks that are out there. And some of it involves what you have to think about, I think, as an organization is, do you want to formalize that to the point where you're doing kind of a weekly check-in report? So at Purple Ink, we have something like this. It's called 15Five. It's actually a very reasonable software. It's on my phone, it's on my desktop as well. And I check in every single Friday. And I have to do that by 5 p.m. Friday. And I talk about what I accomplished this week. And I list my accomplishments for the week. And then it says, what's going to be your focus between now and the next time you do a check-in, which is the following week. And I list what my top 3 or 4 priorities are for the week. And then the nice thing about that is, one, once I fill it out, it goes directly to Jody, the CEO, to whom I report. So she can look at it and she comments back. So she can share comments. And if I say like, "Ooh, I didn't get that done, and here's what happened, or I'm done, but I'm waiting on this from somebody else," she can help me navigate that. The other thing it does is I'm then able to move that over into my one-on-ones with her. And so when I have a one-on-one, she's able to add that one-on-one topics. I'm able to add topics right into that 15Five. And then that gives us the ability to connect those check-ins with my one-on-one meetings. I'm not here to sell you 15Five, whatever works for you. So if it's just a document, like, hey, let's just check in. Where are you? What happened, et cetera, without necessarily having to pick up the phone or get on a Zoom and put eyes on people every single time. There's a way to do that. That makes sense. It also helps you, if you're the leader of that individual, to know where you can help and step in and be a resource for that person.
Question, thank you. I think this will be the final question. Several Saturday events throughout the year talked about offering compensation for time, but board concerns around legality.
So paying people for their time if they're working the event.
Yeah, that's what I'm understanding that as.
Yeah. Yeah. So I am not an attorney and I don't play one on TV or on webinars. So I would say that you probably you definitely need to chat with an attorney about that. The interesting thing is, I don't know if your folks are salary exempt or non-exempt. If they are non-exempt, the law is that you pay people for hours worked as non-exempt employees. But again, there could be some nuances and caveats around there that you would be best to talk to an employment attorney about that. I've also seen organizations that will do, especially if people are on salary, do comp time. Again, though, I would run all of that through your risk management or legal person to be safe and make sure you're complying with federal and state laws, especially because laws change and sometimes they change very quickly, or regulations change very quickly. So it's always best to chat with somebody who's keeping their pulse on everything that's happening right now.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you so much. Great response. Okay. Don't go anywhere. We're wrapping this content, but Thank you, Michelle, for all of this information. I love some of those tips. I was also making notes over here from a well-being standpoint. But before we do wrap up, we want to make sure that everybody here joining us today is connected to the additional no-cost services that the Youth Worker Wellbeing Project offers. Of course, our goal is to increase the well-being of Indiana youth workers. We do that by supporting both organizational pieces and individuals. Organizational supports include telemedicine, virtual mental health services, grants for trauma-informed workplaces. Youth worker supports include peer support groups. And there's going to be some information I might skip through here, but you will get this slide deck. So we've added some additional details for you to review once you get this deck. If your organization is not already enrolled in the telemedicine virtual mental health services through First Stop Health, this is a no-cost program to qualified youth serving organizations for all of your full and your part-time employees and their family members. No cost for your full-time and part-time and their family members. So make sure you're tapping into that. I've included eligibility information here so that you can review this when you get this. You can also find this information online. Peer support groups for all youth workers throughout the state, facilitated by licensed behavioral health specialists from Hope Haven Psychological Resource, 6 different times during the week. Each session is virtual and confidential. Basically, youth workers can connect, share experiences in either topic-based or practice-oriented or even supervisor-specific discussion groups. There is no organizational enrollment required. Youth workers can drop in anytime as needed, as often as they would like. Again, including some additional details here on the well-being and action groups that you can review at a later time. Additionally, there are peer support group options for an organization to schedule to talk through something as a group to meet your team's specific needs. So this information is here as well. Also including the amazing humans that are providing all of those peer support services so you can learn about them. We hope that you enjoyed today and want to come back and see us. So we will be back together on June 18th around flexible schedules, remote work and time off. And I'm thinking that might be wrong. We will get the right one in there. But all of the calendar is online. So June 18th, August 14th, September 11th, and October for this year. And then there are plenty more coming back in the spring of 2026. Again, you can register for all of these online. Additionally, just making sure you are fully connected with all that, not just the Youth Worker Wellbeing Project offers, but all of that IYI offers. One of the best ways to do that is to get to know your regional outreach manager. They are connected to all things IYI and your local community and can make sure that you are taking advantage of all resources being provided. As we conclude, I want to thank you for being with us today and your commitment to the work. Your feedback is important. Michelle said it earlier, we hear you. And so please tell us what you thought about today's session. You can do that with the QR code here. When you complete this survey, you will then be redirected to your certificate of completion. Again, we appreciate your impact and choice to learn alongside us here at the Youth Worker Wellbeing Project. Later today, you will receive an email that will include a copy of the presentation, this evaluation link. If you do not receive that email, check junk. Sometimes they get caught up there. And again, on behalf of the team here at IYI and the Youth Worker Wellbeing Project, thank you again for showing up today and every day for our Indiana youth. We are here for you, right? So remember, you are not alone. Please reach out to us at the Youth Worker Wellbeing Project anytime for any reason. While you're here for Indiana youth, we are here for you. So thanks again, Michelle. Thanks everyone for joining us. Have a wonderful day.